Good evening, dear friends, and good afternoon, dear Theresa. So it's so nice to see you all. So it's Thursday, and we are having our regular Thursday English Without Borders webinars. So today we are hosting Theresa. Last week we also hosted her, and she gave a really good presentation on using task-based lessons to foster English and soft skills. Today, Theresa will be talking about using project-based learning to encourage critical thinking in English. So before I'll give the floor to Theresa, I'd like to give brief information about our today's speaker. Theresa North has over 25 years experience teaching English as a foreign language to students in the United States, Peru, Greece, and Morocco. She has also presented workshops and webinars to her TEFL colleagues and has trained K-12 teachers in Peru and Morocco in the fields of second language pedagogy and the use of digital resources. After receiving her bachelor and master's from the University of Texas, Theresa lived in California briefly before moving to Oregon. In 2019, she was selected as an English language fellow and taught in Casablanca, Morocco. She then worked as a virtual English language fellow, training Moroccan EFL teachers, STEM teachers, Ministry of Education officials, and professionals. Since September, Theresa has been coordinating a volunteer online survival English course for immigrants in the US, which she created. She loves brainstorming with colleagues to create and present EFL content. Thank you so much, Theresa, for doing another session with English Without Borders. We really appreciate your time and efforts to contribute to the English teaching community, not only in Tajikistan, but throughout the world. So now I'll give the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here. As you heard, I love to collaborate with colleagues. It's always a two-way street. I learn a lot from the EFL teachers that I work with, both in Morocco and around the world. So I'm always so glad to do that. As you heard last week, I spoke about task-based learning. And at the end of that presentation, I mentioned that project-based learning is like taking task-based learning and taking it to a completely new level. We have a saying in the US, it's like TBL on steroids. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And you don't need to have watched the TBL presentation. We will look a little bit at the differences between them, and then also some of the similarities, because they both facilitate and foster many of the same skills, not just language acquisition, but also soft skills, critical thinking. So both are fostered by TBL and PBL. So let me share my screen. And oops. Okay, there we are. As I mentioned earlier, before we started, this project-based lessons webinar is actually from a class that I did with many colleagues, but in particular with Jordan Turner, whose name is on this. And it was the culminating project or piece of a five-week series on including digital resources, TBL, flipped classrooms. And so we finished it with project-based lessons. So I'm going to go through this within the hour, But just so you know, it's always nice to take a lot more time to dive deeper into this subject. So if you have the opportunity, if you have a 1 or 2 day workshop, which is focusing on project-based lessons, I strongly recommend doing that. It's great to be able to take the time. So today we're going to talk about what is project-based learning. And then, as I mentioned, we'll talk about how task-based lessons and project-based lessons or project-based learning differ. Then we'll look at a project-based lesson, the characteristics, what the format is, a timeline for that, and then I'll give you some examples so you can see different iterations of what it can look like. And these are just 3 possible iterations. There are so many. And then finally, I'll talk again about working with subject teachers or working with activities that students do outside of the classroom. So to begin, if we look at these 3 possible lessons, one would be reading an article about a historical event and answering comprehension questions. A very typical thing that you might see in a language classroom, particularly one that's going to focus on reading and then writing. Or a lesson on writing a paragraph in the simple past tense, also something that we're all really familiar with. Or finally, creating a play or a diary of a person of that time period of the historical event. So those 3 possible lessons, which one would provide the deepest learning? And you're welcome to write your answer in chat. Okay, so 3. Which one's going to best stick in the student's long-term memory? So a year later or 6 months later, which lesson are they going to remember the most? And which lesson would increase their confidence or make them more motivated? Okay, so I see most people are answering 3. Finally, which one could include the other 2 as prep activities? And so, yeah, if you wanted to create a lesson that would provide deep learning that they would remember, that they could take and use in other contexts, you could do number 3, but you could include numbers 1 and 2 as prep activities for number 3. So it's not an either or situation. We always want to choose whatever tool we have or whatever lesson we have that will best fit what we have, what we need at that time, and how much time we have, because that's always a constraint. So what is project-based learning? A very brief definition would be it's a teaching method in which students gain knowledge and skills working for an extended period of time. So it's going to take more than 1 class session. And they're going to investigate, they're going to respond to authentic, engaging, and complex questions, problems, or challenges. And when it says authentic, that's an important component. It has to mean something to the student, okay? So if we think about meaningful communication in the classroom, it usually comes about when there's a gap between what students know and what they want to know. And that can be an information gap. Students have different information and they have to exchange that information. And the information gaps you can have in a very, very basic English class, right? For example, one that I like to use is when I give two beginning English students maps of a city, a very small portion of a city, maybe 3 or 4 blocks. And each one has different things on their maps. And they have to make a complete map out of the 2 that are missing pieces. So that would be an example of an information gap. The way that they do that is they have to communicate with each other. You could also have a reasoning gap. So we're here, and for example, in a task-based lesson, the teacher has said that we're supposed to do this and this to get here. How do we do that? And a reasoning gap is going to require them to work together to solve that. And then there can be an opinion gap, right? Students are required to agree or disagree with each other and give reasons. So project-based learning has that meaningful communication, and it also has a clear goal. And it has to be clear, just like with the task-based lesson, it has to be a clear goal so that everyone knows when it's completed successfully. But in project-based learning, the goal is chosen by the students. Okay? And we're going to talk a lot about that today because that tends to be the most difficult thing for teachers to allow their students to have that much autonomy and to do it successfully, okay? But a goal might be something like creating a presentation or creating a written text. They might have to create a poster, a visual. They might create a dialogue and record it. I mean, if you have really tech students who know a lot about these things, you could have students who want to create a website. And another example would be a personal budget, okay? Or a budget for a school or a larger entity. So these are all examples of goals. And so here you can see the overlap with task-based lessons. Some of these are the same, but in a task-based lesson, the goal was chosen by the teacher. And all the students did the same thing. They all had to create a presentation, or they all had to create a poster. That's not true of project-based lessons. You can have different groups working on the same theme and the same question, but showing their knowledge in different ways. So here are some examples. For a task-based lesson, you might tell the students, okay, I want you to make a flyer about your favorite activity in town. And they can do that within the space of one class period. You can put them in groups. They can discuss it and create the flyer. You could also have them write a report about the 2017 earthquake of Mexico City, or a natural disaster in Tajikistan, or in wherever you happen to be. You might have them create a video about their best friends. So those are all TBL. For project-based learning, We can't give them the goal. We need to give them the driving question. Okay? Or more accurately, we give them the theme and together we create a driving question. So one of the themes could be tourism, and the driving question might be, how do we make more people want to visit our town? The students can demonstrate their knowledge through an advertising campaign, a brochure, right? Some kind of interview. If we look at the earthquake, the driving question might be, how do we prepare for an earthquake? So one group might design a safety plan or an evacuation route. One group might present a news broadcast. And then the third one, instead of create a video about your best friend, maybe the driving question is, how can you be a good friend? And one group could create a drama, a soap opera. One group might do an advice column. Okay. So this gives you an idea, a little bit of an idea of what the difference is between TBL and PBL. Remember that PBL is based on a problem or question of personal interest. So right here, I have 3 examples of themes and the driving question that was created out of them. And we're going to look at PBL through the lens of these 3 themes and driving questions. So tourism. What is one way to boost local tourism? Global warming. How can teenagers reduce their contribution to global warming? Or transportation. What's the best way to facilitate movement in our city? So these are the characteristics of a driving question. They have to appeal to the students. And they usually do because they're co-created with the students. They have to be concise. They can't be too broad, but they also can't have an easy answer. They should not sound like test questions. Okay, that would not appeal to the students. Often driving questions lead to more questions, and they always have more than one answer. So you want the students to be able to relate the question to their daily lives, but you also want them to have choices for how they're going to demonstrate their knowledge of it. There's going to be an audience at the end when they've created their project, and the question will require investigation. And this is where you can really see that this fosters critical thinking. Okay, they have to investigate, they have to work as a team, they have to question, they have to revisit or review what they've come up with. And these are all important skills that they're learning, and they're learning it through the medium of English. And the project should make a difference. That's what's going to really encourage the students and make them interested in doing this. So in the chat, what would be wrong with this as a driving question? Does anyone have an idea? Why would this not be a good question? Okay, it's a factual question. Excellent. Yes, it's too specific. Yeah, there wouldn't be a lot of disagreement. Would there be more than one answer? Do we know how the flu spreads? Okay, it's not well, not really very personal, no. Yeah, it's going to be the same answer, right? Everyone should come up with the same answer. So we can take that and we can turn it into a better driving question. What's the best way to stop the flu at our school? So why is that a better driving question? Go ahead and write whatever you think about that in the chat. Why is that a better driving question? Okay, it is a relative word, which means there's more than one answer, right? Yeah, exactly. Different answers. You can have disagreement. Okay, they're going to speak to their experience because they actually might have some amazing ideas on what could be done at school. So Mary says it's a more polite question. Okay, yeah, it is going to create, encourage new ideas. Okay. Okay. So project-based learning requires authentic investigation. Okay, you have to find real answers to real questions, and you're going to use critical thinking to do that. So looking again at the three different themes, tourism, global warming, and transportation, some examples of authentic investigation might be, for tourism, you might interview tourists. You might study examples of other cities that have increased the tourism to their cities. For the global warming question on how teenagers can contribute less to global warming, you could read environmental science websites in the target language. You can interview or watch interviews with climate scientists. You can talk to teens about their activities. And then the transportation one, you might look at the question was how to facilitate movement around the city. You might research destinations. Where are people going? How do they get there? You might interview people who ride public transit. You might talk to drivers. Okay. All of these would be authentic investigation. Project-based learning is also multidisciplinary, okay? In fact, I have a very difficult time imagining project-based learning without any other discipline incorporated into it. Because since it is based in the real world, on real world subjects, authentic topics, it's going to automatically incorporate other things. So, of course, you have speaking and listening and reading and writing. But for example, when you have the transportation question, that's an easy one to see how math or science could be incorporated into the project. The same thing for global warming. Okay, so it's content driven, but it's through the targeted language. So the teacher will think before starting the PBL, the teacher will decide, what language skills am I interested in fostering? Okay, and then the teacher will look at what language skills can be or were developed, for example, before, during, and after conducting an interview. Okay. Project-based learning also requires collaboration and teamwork. So the students have to plan and organize, they have to negotiate with each other. They have to arrive at consensus or agreement, and then they have to modify that. So when they are looking at where they are, the questions that they've asked, if it's not getting them to the goal that they need, the answers, the end of the project, they'll have to modify it. They will have to assign responsibility and then make sure that everyone follows through. They have problem solving, and then they have peer feedback. And the great thing about doing it within a project is that these are all skills that we need outside of the classroom in our daily lives. So if you'd like to put in the chat, where might you find one or more of these skills outside of the classroom? All of them at work. Yes, yes, at work. So, and I'll come back to this because we talked a little bit about it last time. When you're trying to get administration on board and they're asking you, why are we doing all these project-based lessons? You can point out that the skills that they're learning are not just English, they're also learning how to be good citizens, right? And that's something that we want to promote with our students. Yeah, organizing events on the road, okay. At work, at home, So as I mentioned, project-based learning allows an exhibition of a real world product. So here are some of, going back to those three driving questions, here are some possible projects that might result. For the tourism, you might have your students, one group might decide to edit the Wikipedia entry for your city. Or another group might produce a travel advertisement. If your class was focused on, had chosen global warming and was focused on the reducing teens' contribution, One group might create a flyer or an educational video. Another group might ask the school to recycle and make it easier for students to recycle at school. And the transportation one, you might have one group that encourages students to bike. Another group might lobby the city for bike lanes or reduced fares on public transit. And again, especially like with the last two, you can see that learning how to negotiate and lobby for things that are beneficial. Again, this is something that we want our students to learn so they can be more productive citizens. Okay. And as somebody put in the chat, yeah, project-based learning definitely helps them learn to be more, to deal better with conflict. So here's a PBL timeline. So the teacher decides, I'm going to do a project-based lesson. The teacher needs to figure out what English competency points might I want my students to get. Okay. And the teacher is going to plan the project sequence. How long am I going to give the students to do this project? Okay. When am I going to have some assessments? I don't know exactly what those assessments will be yet, but when am I going to have a couple of benchmarks so that I know the students are on task? Okay. And then the teacher also will brainstorm some themes and perhaps choose one. These are all things the teacher does before going to the class with the PBL. Then, with the students, the teacher identifies questions and problems within the theme. A big brainstorm on the whiteboard. Okay, you put the theme up there and you can just start writing as many different things about the theme as possible. And from that, the teacher and the students together create a driving question. And it's one driving question for the class. Then the students separate into groups and they come up with authentic final products that will address the driving question. They brainstorm research activities. They think about different informational resources. And during this time, the teacher is acting as a mentor, is there in case the students need help finding some of these resources. Okay, so the teacher hasn't disappeared. The teacher is there. And just like with task-based learning, this is also an opportunity for the teacher to see, do they understand what they're doing? Are they keeping focused? And then finally, the students create and exhibit the final products. So that's the timeline. Something to keep in mind with that is that you're not adding a whole bunch of new things to what you do in the classroom. What you're doing is you're rearranging or modifying some of those things you do in the classroom already. So here's another way to look at the timeline. Normally, if you had a unit and you wanted to do a project at the end, and this is not project-based learning, this is just, you're going to add a project at the end of a traditional unit. The teacher's going to lecture, then there's going to be some kind of activity, and then a quiz. And the teacher says, oh, okay, so they didn't get this. I'm going to lecture again. We'll do another activity and have another quiz. Then we're going to review and have an exam. And then after the exam, I'm going to let them do a project. Project-based learning is different. You're going to start with that driving question, okay? And the students are going to separate. They're going to start doing activities. They might listen to lectures. They're going to go home, do work at home and research. And then you can see here is a benchmark. Often the first benchmark for the teacher might be something like, in 2 weeks, every group must submit an outline of the driving question, how they are going to answer it, and what they think their final project will be. That might be your first benchmark. So you've given them 2 weeks to think about it, start researching, looking for sources, come up with an opinion, and then you expect something from them. Just like in a work situation, right? You would do exactly the same thing at work. You would go research and then you'd come back. This is what we've got so far. Then the students are going to go off again. They're going to start, they're going to discuss some more. They're going to maybe look at some simulations. Maybe that's when they would conduct interviews, okay? Now, remember, they all have the same theme. So you could give them a quiz at that point, you know? It has to be a broad quiz, but for example, if the topic were global warming, then you could give them a quiz just asking them some general questions about global warming, about teens, about what makes global warming, okay? Then that's going to be part of your next benchmark. Do they have an understanding of the topic from their research? Again, they go off, they create. This is when they're really finalizing their project, okay? They start showing you pieces of it, or they talk to others, they get feedback. Maybe they're writing things, they're creating a draft. They're creating the project. And then you have them present the project. Okay, and that's however they've chosen to present it. If they've chosen to lobby, for example, if they've chosen to lobby the school to make it easier to recycle, then they're going to present to the class and perhaps to a wider audience about that. The really great thing about this is because they all had the same theme, but they addressed it differently, this is where they also all learn from each other. Okay? And then finally, the very last thing, of course, just like with task-based learning, the very last thing is reflection. You want to encourage them to reflect on what they did, what they learned, what worked well, what didn't work well, what language they learned. And you can do that as a class and share. You can also have them do it in a journal. So this is what a PBL looks like. This is what a timeline for PBL looks like. You obviously don't want to give them every class for a month, the entire class. What you might end up doing is launching the project in one class and then telling them once a week, I'm going to give you 30 minutes in class to work together. The rest of your project will be done outside of class. You know, if you're interviewing people, if you're watching videos, that will be outside of class, but you will have time in class every week for a month or 2 months to work on it. So here are some examples. What I used with my teachers in Morocco when we did this, I gave them the UN sustainability goals. And I said, okay, and these were STEM teachers. So science, tech, engineering, and math. I said, if you were to choose one of these for your theme, choose one, and then think about a driving question that you could ask with it, and then present on several ways that your students might answer that driving question. So I wanted them to get an idea of how broad the answers might be to that one question, and how it would still focus on language necessary for their particular subject. So my science teachers, some of them chose, for example, sustainable cities and communities, and came up with a driving question out of that. A couple of other examples, a driving question that this particular group came up with was, how can our school best support our overall health and wellness? That was the driving question. And one final product was that students developed a set of health and wellness recommendations. Okay. Another driving question was, what can international media tell us about what is really happening in the world? And so this was great. The students had to use authentic news sources in the target language, and then come up with a presentation about what they got from that and share it with their other peers. So just remember, all of these things happen when students engage in project-based learning. They're more ready for a creative economy and work situation outside of class. They learn to become more creative and take risks. They learn project management. They become problem solvers. They become good at working together as a team. Oh, no. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share with you in the chat. I'm going to share with you 3 resources. Let me see here. Just that you can do at home, or that you can check out at home. And one of them is this video, which I'm sharing it with you because I think it really gives a great review of a lot of what I've said today. So let me put these in the chat. Okay. Okay. So 2 of them are on the sustainable development goals that I mentioned, and then the YouTube video is the one that I think you could watch if you wanted more information about project-based learning. So with that, let me share one more time my screen. I think, here we go. And so this is my contact info here. If anyone has questions after we're finished, or if anyone wants more resources or more information, I'm more than happy to share that with you. Having said that, this is a lot of information. So what questions do you have for me now.
Okay, thank you, Theresa. This was really interesting. You kind of dived into it. You were learning a lot of interesting tools and also approaches, especially. I also kind of I have some experience, but not much of like the questions that you mentioned, like driving questions. And we have a question from our audience. So Mehrin Yoshova is asking, what is the difference between general questions and driving questions?
So a driving question, and I think it was on one of the slides that I posted up there, or that I went through. Driving questions do not have easy answers. Okay, there's not one answer. They also are authentic and of interest to the students. Okay, and an example of the difference between a general question and a driving question was the slide about how does the flu spread has an answer. And the driving question of how can we best stop the spread of the flu at our school is a driving question because there's more than one answer, right? You might have one group that says we should do a presentation on hand washing. You might have another group that says we need to put posters up everywhere. Okay, so that would be my short answer to the difference between them.
Okay, thank you. So another question, can you share your most memorable PBL work of your students and the most challenging one?
So as I mentioned, the workshop series that I did for Moroccan STEM teachers ended in a PBL. Okay, so I like to, when I'm doing webinars or training teachers, I like to present the topic in the same way that the topic, let's see, how am I going to say this? In other words, I like to present the topic the way that, in the manner that we're talking about. For example, when I gave a lesson on flipped lessons, the flipped classroom, I did that. I had them do some things at home before they came so that they could dive deeper into the topic in class. Because of that, they had to do things for PBL to learn about it in the same way that they would then present it to their students. The hardest thing for the teachers always is to allow the students to create the driving question with the teacher and to come up with the projects. It's very, very difficult for teachers to let that control go. And I understand, but you can have amazing results if you do. So, yeah.
Thank you. So my questions from Sardinos Kashimova. She's asking, what if one student in the group does all the work, but the others just keep, being very passive?
So if you think that that might happen, then I would suggest that you create a benchmark that requires input from everyone. For example, a benchmark might be to ask them all to submit, to keep a journal of what they do for 2 weeks on the project with their group. I did this, so-and-so did this, this person did this, and maybe also what they learned from that. If you do that, you're going to see fairly quickly if one person is doing all the work, and then you could deal with that, because obviously that's not teaching them critical thinking or teamwork. That's teaching one of them how to do everything. So yeah, Good question.
I believe you also like have anonymous peer assessment where they just, assess each other, and you can keep a track of who's doing what, right? If the, peers are happy with each other or not.
Mhm. And I like that it's anonymous, because then you're going to have a lot more accurate response. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. So, and then there is a question from Azim, who's asking, how do you help students build teamwork and manage conflicts?
So I would say you want to start small. If you think, and also I think we should start at a younger and younger age. Personally, I don't think that this is only for high school, or it's not just for secondary school. It could also be used for primary school. But also, if you have a class where you think it might be challenging, maybe you do some task-based lessons first, right? Because in a task-based lesson, you can have it all happen within one day. You can have it all happen in the classroom, and you can be there to facilitate that. So if you think it's going to be an issue, I would start small and then work up to it.
So, Theresa, who will be, dividing the class into groups? Is it the teacher, or it's just, who does that?
So we talked about this last time with TBL. My response is that it depends on your classroom. You know your students best. I like to allow the students to choose, but on the other hand, sometimes as the teacher that they can gain so much more if you put them into different groups. So if you want to let them choose, maybe you have them choose and you tell them, and next time you'll get to choose again, but you can't choose the same group. So you're encouraging them to step out of their comfort zone, maybe a little.
Yeah, thank you. So a question from our audience: in a traditional school with kind of a curriculum which doesn't have the project-based learning, what is the first step to integrate that into your lesson plan or just even curriculum?
So I talked a little bit about this last time. I do realize that sometimes it can be challenging to get administration on board with project-based learning, because it's so different. Because you are using other subjects, I think if you can start communicating with other teachers, science teachers, math teachers, and start coming together on, hey, I'm thinking of doing a project. Do you think that there's a math topic that you're about to explore that would go really well with this topic? If you can start to pull in other teachers, then I think you can do it earlier, because it won't just be you, right? You will be working within a supportive environment.
That's a really good approach. Yeah, it also makes the staff at school to be more kind of to get closer and to collaborate. Not just English teachers; it could be English and math, English and geography. So,
right.
Perfect. Yeah. So another question from our audience, and I believe you have already answered that: is PBL appropriate for elementary students? So I believe you already said that it could be implemented in any kind of class or level, right?
Yeah, and the really great thing about implementing it earlier is you can, let's be honest, you tend to have a little bit more control over 7-year-olds than you might have over 15-year-olds. I've been in both of those classrooms. And so you can implement it and have them start learning how to do these things so that they grow older knowing how to use those skills. And when they become 15, they already know how to work as a team and peer feedback and share responsibilities. So yeah, I would say the earlier the better.
Yeah, agree. Yeah. So you mentioned about the goal, and you said that it's students in TBL, it's teacher to set the goal, but in PBL, it's students themselves to set a goal. So if it's them to set a goal, then how can the teacher assess, the final work if different groups set, different goals?
Okay, so that's a great question. So you have set the theme as the teacher. The class has created the driving question. Now, remember we had benchmarks, right? So at the first benchmark, if you see that a group is not addressing the driving question with some kind of project, that's where the teacher needs to be giving feedback of, remember, you have to come up with a project that answers this question. What you've created here, I don't see that it's answering that question. And so that's how you're going to assess it. And hopefully you address it early and you don't get to the end and have something turned in that's completely inappropriate and doesn't address it. If at the first benchmark they aren't, that's where you can really help them because they want to succeed, right? Especially if they're going to be presenting in front of their peers, they want to be successful. So that's where we can help them to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Theresa, another question is, usually when we talk about project work, we mean it's like group work. Can it be done also as individual work?
I would say not really. I mean, if you did it as individuals, you would miss out on so many of the advantages of project-based learning. You can give them something that they have to do, but it's not really project-based learning because there's no teamwork, there's no, cooperation. Yeah, that would be my quick answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Project-based learning is kind of it's designed to set and to meet different goals, right? Like one of them is just to build this teamwork and to help people, students, learn how to work with others, right? So I think this is one of the great benefits of project work. Yes. So, but anyway, they will divide the task between themselves and they work individually in some sense, right?
Yeah. An example was last week when we were talking about TBL, you may have a group that decides to create a poster or a website, and one of them may have a lot of skills in that area. Then they're going to defer to that person. Hopefully they will also learn some things, but why would you not use the person who has so much information about that particular topic? So yeah, there will be pieces they'll do by themselves.
Thank you, Theresa. I wish we had more time to discuss around this topic because it's so interesting, but maybe this will be the last question. And so what is your recommendation and what challenges have you faced that those who haven't started doing project, like the teachers who haven't done it before, what are the main challenges that you want them to know, to be aware before, so that when they do that, they already have tools to answer, you know, those challenges?
Let's see. I would say, well, first of all, if you're going to do if you're going to start using project-based learning, I recommend at least watching the YouTube video that I put in the chat box. Try something smaller. Okay. I'm a big proponent for not jumping in with something huge. If it's your first time doing it, try something small, and you're going to give them a month. And you know, you're not expecting a website to be developed or anything like that. Also, and have faith that they can do it. Even if they're primary school students, they definitely can do it. And I think so often they surprise us with what they create. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think we need to, as you mentioned, the earlier we give them this space to explore, you know, that environment in which they live, the better it is, because as you said, it develops in them the sense of kind of responsibility. They already develop this kind of feeling that they're responsible for their environment, because everything we have, it relates to our environment. So yes, absolutely. I think we should, even in the assessment, I believe that we should, you know, appreciate everyone's work, because I mean, they enjoy doing that, right? And as a teacher, you should appreciate and encourage them more, you know, being involved. And this is, I think, the best way to learn both the content and also the language component. So thank you very much, Theresa, for this wonderful session. I really hope that we will have more sessions with you in the future. And dear audience, thank you for your active participation and for the questions that you asked to our speaker today. So we will all see next Thursday. So good evening, and for good evening to all the rest of the evening, and for Theresa, we wish good afternoon the rest of the day, right? Thank you.
Thank you.